Probably one of the best lines from a series of unfortunate events. If we wait till we're ready, then we're going to be waiting the rest of our lives.
Pretty much. Who said it? Olaf?
No, it was the Baudelaire kids.
Oh, the Baudelaire kids said it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's more interesting than talking about this godforsaken show. You know how a format that you're thinking to yourself, how the hell did this get greenlit? Well, let me combine three things for you. The destruction of prized possessions, gross out humor that wasn't even funny in the mid-90s, and all the nihilistic behavior that existed on MTV in 1994. Well, you get trashed.
The Jackie Rabbit's photograph can survive today on Trash. You're a loser. Say goodbye to your new car. No. Wrong, Jane. Your color television is history. Really fast.
Buckle in, folks. This one is gonna get rough. Debuting on Valentine's Day of 1994, MTV decided to unleash trash onto the unsuspecting masses to break up time between music videos and the real world. Hosted by a very young Chris Hardwick, two teams of friends competed in when they must answer questions to save possessions they brought onto the show, and later on their teammate from Humiliation at the hands of Mark the Trasher. The show kind of asked the question, how far will people go to get on TV? But that gets erased by everything quickly because of, well, everything else happening on the show. My brother had I think a brilliant theory in regards to the show. Now, remind me, producer person, you said that when a contestant on remote control got sent off the air, they would somehow wind up on Trashed?
Yeah, because when they get pulled away from the studio, it looks like they're basically kidnapped. Then they get kidnapped and then put on Trashed as punishment for failing on remote control.
Makes sense to me. I mean, if remote control is the equivalent of a game show heaven, then this show's the equivalent of game show hell.
And now, here's the host and the pot-bellied first base coach of this minor league ball club of freaks, Chris Hardwick. Okay. All right. Okay.
And what sucks, though, is that this show is loaded with talent, especially Chris Hardwick. Fresh out of college, Chris Hardwick hosts this show, and during this time, he was working stand-up in the alternative comedy scene in Los Angeles. As for his hosting, he's very reminiscent of a lot of MTV VJs at the time. He straddles the line of being overly shouty and inept, but being very competent in what he does. It's pretty weird to me how this would turn into the guy who would run the Nerdist empire 2 decades later. What I also find weird is that in 1994, he would be the guy who would exuberantly say, "We're gonna trash your stereo! Come on out, Mark!" And then, 25 years later, he's doing The Wall. And then he winds up like this. You guys, you are so brave. You are so deserving of all of this money. Everybody is proud of you, and I'm glad you're going away with $755,201. I'm so proud of you. Give him a round of applause, everybody. Yes. Why did I sound like Paul Bearer there for a second?
I was wondering when you were going to notice that. Because you sounded like Paul Bearer pretty much that entire time.
Now to answer this question, does the show suck? Oh, yes! And now let's talk about the cast of characters. First off, we have Andrea Miller, who was the co-host because every single damn show needed a co-host who was little more than a bit player. Andrea's role was little more than acting as a showgirl for an item that was selected to be trashed, or helping Mark the Trasher with his shenanigans. She'd also hype up the grand prize of Kentucky Holidays in the beginning of the show, and the end of the show plugs. So she was a little more than an announcer than the actual announcer was. I honestly don't get this. You have one bit player doing the announcing in David Allen, who actually had a decent funny announcer voice to play into, and Andrea does little more than model. At least get her to do some categories so she doesn't feel like an afterthought. Speaking of the bit players, it lists a who's who of comedy geniuses. Brian Posehn, Doug Benson, Chris Henchy, Steve Higgins, Wayne Higgins, and now fresh off of Mystery Science Theater 3000, Joel Hodgson were on the show and wrote the bits as well. Not only that, Jeanine Garofalo was on there as well. All of these people are funny as hell. Unfortunately, they weren't funny on this show, and it was apparent. Most of the gags fell absolutely flat. Sure, it was named at those disenchanted teens on MTV at the time, which meant they had gross humor and terrible gay jokes, but not even the talent on hand could save the gags. I'll talk more about this later. And what better time than here? And what better time than now? Yeah, that's a Rage Against the Machine lyric, but I couldn't find anything pithy to connect this segment to the other segment in a way that was even remotely interesting. Kind of like this show, for example. Show starts with an opening toss-up that anybody can answer. The team that wins the toss-up picks the first item to be put up for destruction. Then the show falls off a cliff, especially when you get to these sketches. Loads and loads of painfully unfunny sketches. Instead of doing something akin to remote control, i.e. having the category behind the item and building the game like that, they decided to do something a lot like Beavis and Butthead and do gross out and stupid humor. The difference between Trashed and Beavis and Butthead is that Beavis and Butthead's humor was actually kind of funny and had some decent hooks to it. Trash sketches didn't and were painfully unfunny. Then Chris asked a question that vaguely relates to the sketch worth 50 points in round 1 and 100 points in round 2. The catch is that in order to save the item from destruction, the team has to get 2 out of 3 right. If they do, then the item is saved and they get control. If not, then the item gets destroyed. Now let's talk about the titular trashing of the show. The person who does the destruction is comedian Mark Fite. He plays this maniac who just loves destroying things with various machines and power tools and tie-ins to music videos and all sorts of crazy inventions. Does he come off as one-dimensional? Yeah, but this could be said for a lot of the cast of characters on the show. Very rarely does he do anything but shout. He is the show's villain in a sense and plays it to a T. There's one moment where he didn't trash an item, and that's when someone brought in this valuable autographed baseball. Instead of trashing it, and the thing was he was going to drop this thing into a bucket of tar, ruin it entirely, he just threw it into the crowd. It's a small act of contrition, which I actually did have the episode in question to show to you. Now, this brings me to an interesting quandary about the show. The contestants who applied to be on the show and get selected to be on the show know that there's a high chance of their items could pretty much be destroyed. So, clearly there has to be some way for the contestants to know to be let in onto the joke and bringing crappy stuff. When items are talked about in the beginning, Announcer Man has some quips about them. They range from being somewhat funny to be cringeworthy bad. The point is they have some sort of personal value to the player. Some players know that they didn't want to have their actual possessions trashed on TV. A former contestant named Jace talked about his show in a blog post in 2006. He knew of the danger and decided to give them items that either didn't work or were of little value. So he gave him a broken boombox, a pair of ugly boots that he doesn't wear anymore, and a broken VCR. It was clear he knew the show was a joke. I guess others took it more seriously, putting up stuff like palm dresses and actual working electronics, and sometimes their own hair. I'm guessing it was the thinking that the more valuable stuff, the higher the chance they got on. But then, you already know you're going to be on the show, so give them some junk and make it a spectacle of sorts. Now, here's what the production team should have done. When the contestants get selected to be on the show, let them know of the joke. Have them bring in junk or stuff that is of little value or they don't mind seeing trashed, and when it comes on the show and it does become trashed, ham it up to the audience. Let them in on the joke. That would have saved the show a little bit, especially when it comes to the trashings and the humiliations at the end of the show. Oh yeah, the humiliations. The final round has one member of each team put up for trashing. Chris gives the 2 remaining contestants the 3 possible answers for the clues they're going to receive. Yeah, this is the same as remote controls, this, that, or the other thing. They are then given 39 seconds to play because, of course, the show has to try way too hard to be edgy and different. Each correct answer is worth 150 points in the final round, so a team that stunk in the first 2 rounds can come back to win the game. I should also point out that this has happened on a couple of occurrences. The team with the most points at the end wins and goes on to the grand prize round, and the losing team has their representation humiliated in certain ways. The scale of the humiliations range wildly. Some are quite tame, such as someone serenading them as the biggest loser. Some do have a bit of mess involved, such as those that involve pies, or Mark dumping stuff like slime or Gatorade or even beach stuff on them. But then there are those that do cross the line. One in particular had a loser being sent to loser jail and being put together with a cellmate who wants to... Yeah, I think you could draw the lines with the way he's acting in the clip I'm showing. Even back in 1994, these jokes weren't funny. Prison rape jokes isn't and never will be funny. Another line-crossing act was having the contestants eat spoiled food, which in the wrong way can kill them. Also is having frat mates pour beer on them and throwing up on them. Certain humiliations are fine, but when you cross that line, then your audience will turn off in droves. The bonus game is played more like a more evil version of the winner's circle from Pyramid. Each contestant is shown 3 monitors and they have to convey the artist without using any part of the artist's name or band's name, songs, albums, or lyrics. Each one guessed right increases the value of the prize won at the end, where all 6 won a Kentucky European vacation. As a Pyramid variant, it's fine, and that's about all I could say about this endgame. It's fine and functional, it's just that it felt really empty after the first 27 minutes of the show. Apparently, the viewing audience didn't care much about the show either. After the 50 episodes that were taped, aired, and reran once, the show was canceled in July of 1994. I didn't know if reruns were on the network on overnights like they did with Remote Control in the early 90s, but nobody was yearning for more. Now, there's one thing I kind of want to mention, and I forgot to a couple of moments ago, and that has to do with what the loser's prize was for losing. If you lost the front game, you had to spend 10 hours of community service. The reason for that is in the contract the contestant signed. And in the contract, that said, since this show has fraught with meaningless destruction, you have to do something to redo it, or replace it, or something to that effect. A former contestant posted this on the show after he lost. This was, I think he posted in like 1998 or something. And to me, that's just bad ideas. I mean, they're humiliated enough. Why have them do community service? At least say this week's charity is the Rainforest Action Network or Greenpeace or something to that effect. Anyway, to be completely honest, this might be one of the worst game shows of the 90s. Bar none. Because of what it does. It squanders the talent. You had a lot of comedic talent there who are really funny. They just weren't given anything funny to do on this show. Sure, the comedians wrote stuff themselves, but sometimes you need that creative control person to say, "Go! Bad boy! Bad boy!" And they didn't have that on this show. What also is wrong was the meaningless destruction of the objects and not letting the contestants in on the joke. Do that, and you could have had a much smoother experience. But instead, you just get something that feels mean-spirited, ugly, evil. It's something that just makes you feel unclean after watching. Well, that's going to do it for me for Game Show Garbage. I'm Cindy Simon. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you liked this video, leave a thumbs up. If you have a suggestion on what to induct for Game Show Garbage next time, leave a comment below. Also, subscribe to this channel if you want more. And if you want to see videos a day before anybody else, become a Patreon backer at patreon.com/GameShowGumbo. I'm Cindy Simon. Until next time, bye-bye. Thank God this is over. Jesus Christ, this is a terrible show.